Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Half-Blood Prince is one of the most polarizing films in the Harry Potter universe. Some appreciate its dark, contemplative atmosphere, while others criticize its clear departures from the book. But what if there are tiny details hidden in the story that could completely change how you see it? Today we're going to explore the most interesting hidden symbols and surprising facts you might have missed. Enjoy watching. Number 1. Millennium Bridge. The Muggle world rarely takes center stage in Harry Potter films, so many viewers simply forget that the story is set in the 1990s. That's what led to a fun little movie mistake. At the start of Half-Blood Prince, Death Eaters wreak havoc on the streets of London, and one of their targets is the Millennium Bridge. But here's the catch: that bridge didn't open until 2000, meaning it couldn't have looked like that at the time the film is set. Number 2. Family ties. In Half-Blood Prince, we see a teenage Tom Riddle. Everyone knows that adult Voldemort is played by Ralph Fiennes, but far fewer viewers realize that his younger version was played by a close relative. Hero Fiennes Tiffin, who portrayed teenage Tom, is Ralph's nephew, but he didn't land the role just because of family connections. He auditioned and was chosen from many other actors. Number 3. Harry Potter's son. Here's one of those moments that's almost impossible to catch on first viewing. Half-Blood Prince features a brief cameo by the actor who would later play Harry Potter's son in the final scene of the series. This time, he's just an extra. You can spot him in Diagon Alley. It's a fun Easter egg for the most attentive fans. Number 4. Photograph. The film never really explains how Dumbledore figured out where to look for the Horcrux. In the climax, he simply brings Harry to a seaside cave. But why there? If you look carefully at the scene where Dumbledore first meets Tom Riddle, you can spot a photograph of that very cave. It's barely visible, but it's the clue that tells Dumbledore where the Horcrux is hidden. Number 5. 7 stones. The number 7 has a special meaning in the wizarding world. Half-Blood Prince also drops several hints about this symbolism. In one scene with young Riddle, you can see 7 stones carefully arranged in front of him. This foreshadows his plan to create exactly 7 Horcruxes. Number 6. Mint toothpaste. During potions class, Hermione leans over the love potion and explains that it smells different to everyone, whatever they find most attractive. Hermione claims she smells mint toothpaste, but the potion's smoke turns bright orange. This contrast sparked a fan theory that she was actually thinking about Ron Weasley and just trying to hide it. Number 7. Rupert. Professor Slughorn, obsessed with collecting talented students, constantly gets Ron Weasley's name wrong. Every time he invents a new name starting with R, and in one scene he even calls him Rupert. That's no accident. It's the real name of actor Rupert Grint, who plays Ron. Number 8. Newspaper in the cafe. When Harry sits in the Muggle cafe near the train station, the world feels almost normal. The lights are soft. The waitress smiles. He tries to forget everything waiting for him at Hogwarts. But on the table beside his elbow, the Daily Prophet lies folded open. The headline reads, "Death Eater attacks spread panic across Britain." The letters are bold enough to catch the eye even in the shadows. In the book, Rowling writes, the wizarding world was sliding into terror and confusion. The newspaper in that quiet cafe is proof. Even here, in a place without magic, Voldemort's darkness has reached across the barrier. Harry's fingers brush the edge of the page. For a moment, he almost picks it up, but he stops. He doesn't want to be reminded of the fight waiting for him. While the waitress asks about his plans, the paper stays between them like a silent warning. No matter how ordinary the moment seems, it can't last. The war is coming, and the Daily Prophet makes sure he never forgets it. Number 9. Draco's watch. When Draco sits slumped by the window of the Hogwarts Express, the corridor outside seems far away. He keeps his left hand close to his chest, as if he's hiding something. But when he adjusts his sleeve, the camera shows the watch on his wrist. The glass catches the light for a second. There are no numbers, no ticking hands, only an empty silver circle staring back at him. This watch isn't an accident of costume. It is a symbol. The blank face tells the truth Draco can't admit. He has run out of time. No matter what he does, he cannot change the orders Voldemort has given him. In the book, Harry wonders, was it possible that Malfoy didn't want this at all? That question hovers over the empty watch dial like a curse. When Pansy Parkinson tries to talk to him, Draco doesn't answer. His eyes stay locked on the window, but his fingers press against that smooth watch face as if he wishes it could move again. It never does. The circle remains still. A cold reminder that his future has already been decided. Number 10. Marvolo's Ring. When Dumbledore arrives at number 4 Privet Drive, he lifts his blackened hand to greet Harry. The skin is shriveled, stained with dark veins that crawl up to his wrist. The film never explains why his hand looks cursed. But in the book, this wound comes from Marvolo Gaunt's ring. Dumbledore tried to destroy the Horcrux hidden inside it. And he also tried, for one brief moment, to use the resurrection stone set in the band. J.K. Rowling wrote, "He put it on Harry because he hoped to see his family again. That secret longing cost him everything. The curse almost killed him the instant he slipped the ring on his finger. Only Snape's intervention slowed the poison, trapping it in his hand like a warning he would carry to the grave. Every time he gestures in the film, that twisted hand reminds you of his failure to let go of the past. When he drinks the potion in the cave, you can see the hand trembling as he lifts the goblet. It's a silent confession. Even the greatest wizard is still human, still vulnerable to regret. The blackened flesh becomes a symbol of the price Dumbledore paid for one moment of weakness, the scar he could never heal. Number 11, Phoenix Song. After Dumbledore falls from the astronomy tower, the entire castle feels frozen. Students gather around his body in silent shock. No one dares to speak. If you listen closely, beneath the sounds of wind and distant sobs, you will hear something almost hidden. A clear, haunting note rises above the courtyard. It is the voice of Fawkes, Dumbledore's phoenix, singing a song of mourning. In the book, J.K. Rowling writes, "And it seemed to Harry that the song was inside him instead of just around him." The filmmakers chose not to make the melody too loud. They let it drift like a memory you can't quite catch. When Ginny weeps against Harry's shoulder, that faint music wraps around them. It feels as if Fawkes himself has come to say goodbye. This detail makes the moment more than just a death. It becomes a ritual of farewell. When Fawkes finally disappears, his silhouette crosses the grey sky. He is alone now, just as the headmaster left him. But his song lingers for a moment longer, a final gift to the man who saved him from the flames. Even after the credits roll, you can almost still hear that note, a promise that nothing truly precious is ever lost forever. Number 12. Name in the textbook. When Harry discovers the old potions textbook in the cupboard, it looks ordinary at first. The cover is battered, the spine is cracked. But on the inside page, a name is scrawled in dark ink. This book is the property of the Half-Blood Prince. The letters tilt sharply to the right, each line confident and precise. Most viewers see only the mystery. Yet if you remember the scenes from the Order of the Phoenix, the truth is hidden in plain sight. In the pensive, when Harry watches young Severus Snape sitting by the Black Lake, you can glimpse the same handwriting in his school notes. The letters loop in exactly the same way. The P has a long tail curling under the word. The S begins with a hard, downward stroke. That script belongs to no one else. It is Severus's private mark carried from childhood into the classroom where he would one day teach. Later, when Hermione studies the textbook, she frowns over the handwriting. She says, "There's something odd about it. It looks familiar." The film never draws a line under this clue, but for anyone who remembers the young boy in the oversized coat, it is obvious. The Half-Blood Prince is the same lonely student Lily once defended. The handwriting is the key the filmmakers left for anyone patient enough to look. In the book, Snape finally snarls, "You dare use my own spells against me? I am the half-blood prince." That confession only seals what the audience has already learned if they were watching carefully. The script in the margins was a silent confession all along. The boy who scribbled Levicorpus would become the man who taught Harry how to save lives and how to take them. Number 13, Slughorn's Trophy Cabinet. When Harry steps into Horace Slughorn's office for the first Slug Club gathering, the room glitters with strange treasures. There are jeweled boxes, shimmering bottles, and silver masks. But one object seems to shine brighter than all the rest. On a shelf behind Slughorn's chair sits a golden cup, its twin handles shaped like delicate animal paws. The cup glows in the candlelight. For a moment, it looks almost exactly like Helga Hufflepuff's cup, the Horcrux Harry and Hermione will risk their lives to destroy years later. Slughorn never mentions the cup. He is too busy praising Gwenog Jones and offering crystallized pineapple to Harry. Yet that quiet detail feels deliberate. It hints at the professor's hidden guilt, the part of his memory he tries so hard to bury. In the book, Dumbledore tells Harry he has tried to bury it, but he cannot destroy it. The cup on the shelf becomes a silent witness, a symbol of how Tom Riddle charmed Slughorn into sharing forbidden knowledge. Later, when Harry finally extracts the true memory, the connection becomes clear. Slughorn's voice trembles as he admits, "I told him about Horcruxes." That moment is the key to understanding why he fills his office with trophies. Every glittering object distracts him from the one truth he cannot polish away. The cup's resemblance to the Horcrux is a quiet accusation. No matter how many prizes he collects, he cannot pretend he didn't help create a monster. During that first meeting, Slughorn calls the cup a little trifle I picked up on my travels, as if it means nothing, but the audience sees what he cannot. The golden cup foreshadows a much darker prize hidden in Bellatrix's vault at Gringotts. It proves that even the most respectable collector can be blind to the danger sitting right in front of him. Number 14, Dark Shapes on the Millennium Bridge. When the Death Eaters attack the Millennium Bridge in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, most viewers only see chaos and destruction, but if you watch closely, you will spot something much stranger than crumbling concrete. Dark shapes swirl above the bridge, moving like living shadows against the evening sky. They aren't smoke or drifting ash. These black vortices are the Death Eaters themselves, streaking through the air in their inhuman form. In the book, J.K. Rowling describes them as black shapes streaming across the sky, a vision so terrifying it freezes Muggles in place. One of those shadows is Bellatrix Lestrange, laughing as she hurls curses at the buildings below. The camera catches her shape, spinning apart and reforming, a visual hint that the Death Eater's magic breaks the ordinary laws of transfiguration. Unlike members of the Order of the Phoenix, who simply disapparate and reappear, Voldemort's followers melt into darkness. This is their signature, the mark of fear they carry everywhere. Even Fenrir Greyback's silhouette is visible among them, a hulking smear of darkness that lingers longer than the others. During the attack, you can see a terrified shopkeeper through the cafe window, staring up as the black forms rush overhead. In that moment, it is clear these are not just wizards wearing masks, they are predators, monsters who have traded their humanity for the power to terrify an entire city. The swirling darkness feels almost alive, a deliberate reminder that the Death Eaters revel in their own legend. Rowling wrote, "They came in a billow of darkness, and the night itself seemed to swallow them, capturing the unnatural way their presence distorts the air." The filmmakers used this image to contrast them with Dumbledore's allies. When Tonks and Lupin arrive in the story, they appear in clean flashes of light, but Bellatrix and her companions move like shadows torn loose from the earth. The visual difference shows everything about their purpose. The Order comes to protect, while the Death Eaters come to consume. Even a single glimpse of those whirling shapes makes it impossible to mistake one side for the other. Number 15, Green Potion in the Cave. Dumbledore's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the chalice resting in the hollow of the stone basin, the green potion glistening with a malevolence that seemed to pulse and breathe. This moment in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince often slides past the eyes of first-time viewers, overshadowed by the sheer horror of Dumbledore's agony. Yet there was a subtle but chilling artistic choice embedded in that seething liquid. Its colour was not some arbitrary fantasy green, but a vivid, poisonous hue, eerily resonant with the jet of sickly light that burst from Voldemort's wand whenever he cast the killing curse. The potion, swirling in that unlit cavern, mirrored the curse that had extinguished so many lives. As Dumbledore braced himself to drink, readers and viewers alike witnessed an echo of Avada Kedavra in the very substance meant to guard a fragment of Voldemort's mutilated soul. The green colour served as a visual cipher, linking the cavern to every dark moment in the series where green light preceded death. One only has to remember how Harry relived the memory of his mother's final moments. A flash of green light, and then nothing. The green of the killing curse was the last thing Lily Potter ever saw. By saturating the potion with the same poisonous tint, Voldemort ensured that the act of drinking it would feel like a slow, humiliating death, not just a test of endurance. Dumbledore, who had faced countless dangers, was forced to consume a liquid that whispered to him of finality. Of that same green radiance which he had fought all his life to hold back. While many details in the film adaptation race by a mid-visual spectacle, the green potion remains one of the most deliberate artistic decisions. The filmmakers could have chosen any number of shades to convey the potion's toxicity, bilious yellow, corrosive black, but they chose the shade most associated with Voldemort's reign of terror. This decision unites the imagery of the killing curse, the dark mark, and the Horcrux's defenses into a single oppressive motif. That choice becomes even more significant when you realize that in the books the potion's effects are described as torment that transcends physical pain. The text says it was cruel and Dumbledore knew it, revealing that Voldemort designed the potion to cripple the drinker's spirit as much as the body. The green colour is not merely symbolic of death, but of Voldemort's particular brand of sadism, how he transformed fear itself into a weapon. He made the protection of his Horcrux not simply a clever trap, but an instrument of psychological warfare. Dumbledore was the greatest wizard alive, yet even he was forced to beg for mercy in hoarse whispers, clutching at the stone edge as the poison dragged horrors out of his mind. For readers familiar with the series' recurrent symbols, the green glow was more than just a chilling visual. It was a reminder that Voldemort's darkness always carried the same unmistakable signature. When Harry tried to help Dumbledore, dipping the goblet again and again into the basin, he could hardly bear the thought of forcing that green venom past Dumbledore's lips, but it had to be done. "You have to keep drinking, Professor," he pleaded, though the words felt like betrayal. That is the power of Voldemort's aesthetic. It reduces every act of heroism to a compromise. The green potion was like a distilled version of the dark mark, that ghastly emerald skull that floated above houses the Death Eaters had destroyed. Its colour was the colour of submission. It was the colour that made the bravest wizard Harry had ever known crumple in despair. This detail, so easily missed on first viewing, is an echo of Voldemort's other creations. The greenish glow is also seen in the locket Horcrux, when it opens to reveal visions meant to shatter Ron Weasley's resolve. When Ron confronts the locket in the Deathly Hallows, a great gaping eye opens within it, emanating a sickly green sheen that bathes the room. That consistency in colour design is not coincidence, but design, a quiet statement that all these horrors come from the same mind, the same ambition to conquer death by making death omnipresent. Even in Voldemort's earliest appearances, green had been his herald. When the Dark Mark was conjured over the Quidditch World Cup, the emerald serpent twisted in the sky like a prophecy of doom. In the cave, the green potion seemed to recite that prophecy back to Dumbledore. You could almost imagine Voldemort's voice layered into the liquid itself, mocking any attempt to outwit him. That was the genius of the enchantment. It was not merely protection, it was an indictment. Anyone strong enough to reach the basin was still reduced to weakness the moment the green glow met their eyes. This is why Dumbledore's ordeal resonates so deeply when you rewatch it with attention to that color. You see how the potion becomes an embodiment of everything Voldemort was: cunning, cruel, and unrepentantly theatrical. The green sheen announced that no matter how clever Dumbledore was, he would never escape the reality of Voldemort's evil. The darkness of the cave, the lapping waves beyond the stone ledge, and the green liquid together composed a stage where Dumbledore's strength would be dismantled, sip by poisoned sip. Harry's horror, as he watched Dumbledore sink further into delirium, was magnified by that sinister color. In that moment, the green was not only Voldemort's power, but a promise of the future Harry would inherit, a world where that same light could take his life as easily as it had taken his parents'. As Dumbledore choked out fragmented pleas, "Make it stop. Kill me," the color seemed to seep into every corner of the cave. It was a visual manifestation of surrender, and Voldemort, even in absentia, had ensured that his enemies would taste that surrender before they could claim victory. Number 16, Slughorn and Honeyduke's Treats. Horace Slughorn never appeared in the series as a villain, and yet the scene on the Hogwarts Express in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince plants a small but unsettling seed in the reader's mind. That moment when Harry opens the compartment door and finds the former potions master surrounded by boxes upon boxes of confectionery is not merely comic relief. It is a glimpse into Slughorn's character, and the famous Honeyduke's honeycombs are more than a sugary indulgence. They are props that reveal his deeper appetites. Slughorn sits amid his sweet hoard, a stout, balding man with a walrus moustache, and the text notes how his eyes were glinting greedily through the darkness even before Harry makes his presence known. He has been hiding here, away from Dumbledore's search, but also gorging himself on treats that symbolize his craving for all that is pleasurable and exclusive. This detail can escape notice when the story barrels forward into Voldemort's return and Dumbledore's mission to secure Slughorn's memory. But when the reader pauses to consider it, the arrangement of the boxes, fizzing whizbees, cauldron cakes, and the honeycombs resembles a trophy room. Slughorn is literally stockpiling sweetness, just as he accumulates gifted young witches and wizards in what he calls his little collection. His relationship to pleasure is intertwined with his tendency to consume people's talents and reputations for his own gratification. The image is more pointed than it first appears. He is gluttonous for recognition and the aura of importance that proximity to famous students brings. J.K. Rowling describes the scene in a way that balances absurdity with a subtle chill. The compartment is cluttered with brightly coloured wrappers and ornate boxes. The honeycombs stand out because they are so specifically named and evoke a childhood nostalgia, as if Slughorn is trying to retreat into something comforting to escape the dangerous reality outside. When Harry enters, the professor's first instinct is not embarrassment but calculation. He assesses Harry's importance before offering a seat. The sweets become a shield, a curtain behind which he can measure the value of the boy before him. Slughorn's fondness for honeycombs also mirrors his soft, almost sticky manner with his favoured students. He flatters them, offers them treats, and nurtures them with compliments in a way that resembles luring bees to honey. This is not simply generosity, it is a transaction. For Slughorn, relationships are edible, something to be tasted, savoured, and sometimes discarded once their flavour is gone. The Half-Blood Prince is the book where the seductive quality of influence is most visible, and Slughorn's honeycombs are its symbol. When he finally relents and returns to Hogwarts, the same hunger drives him to recreate his Slug Club dinners and lavish parties. He invites Harry, Hermione, Neville and Ginny to his compartment later on the train, offering more treats. The honeycombs reappear, along with crystallized pineapple, and the array of confections becomes a ritual. Help yourselves, he says in the book, waving a pudgy hand at the table, as though generosity alone absolves him of ulterior motives. But the scene is laced with tension because Harry knows Dumbledore wants something from Slughorn that Slughorn would rather bury in the sweetness of self-indulgence. In the larger context of the series, Slughorn's obsession with fine things, good food, famous names and flattering company forms a contrast with Dumbledore's ascetic style. Dumbledore never hoards relationships or material pleasures. He eats modestly and cares little for status, while Slughorn is a connoisseur of both delicacies and notoriety. This difference matters because it underscores why Dumbledore's trust must be earned freely, while Slughorn's can be bought with a little flattery and the promise of a famous connection. The honeycombs, therefore, become a clue to a deeper flaw, Slughorn's inability to detach his personal gratification from his sense of duty. One could almost pity him, sitting alone with his mountain of treats as the world darkens beyond the window. In that moment on the train, he is both comic and tragic. A man who has retreated into sugar because he cannot face the bitterness of his own choices. He helped Voldemort learn about Horcruxes, and though he has hidden that memory, the guilt still drips like honey through his consciousness. Each honeycomb is a reminder that the pleasures he has pursued cannot erase the consequences. There is also a visual irony in how Slughorn clings to these childish indulgences while claiming the role of worldly mentor. The boy who comes to fetch him is not simply Harry Potter, but the chosen one, the emblem of everything Slughorn values in a protégé. Yet the professor's first reaction is to pretend he isn't there. He shrinks back, hoping the sugar and clutter will conceal him. His greed for sweets and his fear of moral reckoning exist side by side, and that dissonance is one of Rowling's most incisive character studies. When the story later reveals Slughorn's buried memory, the reader can trace a line from that compartment filled with honeycombs to the night in his office when he told Tom Riddle about splitting the soul. The same softness, the same craving to be admired, let him yield to Riddle's curiosity. The sweets in the train compartment are harmless, but they symbolize a lifetime of small indulgences that ultimately contributed to Voldemort's rise. Slughorn's weakness is not evil. It is the inability to say no to anything that flatters or comforts him. Even the name of the honeycombs reinforces the theme. Honey suggests richness, smoothness, and sweetness, but in excess it is cloying, oppressive. Slughorn is a man drowning in his own appetite. Rowling does not need to spell this out because the image is so strong. A respected teacher who has made himself ridiculous in a pile of boxes that should belong to children, not to a man in late middle age. The honeycombs are not merely a snack, they are a statement of character. Number 17, Draco's family ring. In the dim corridors of Hogwarts, where torchlight flickered against damp stone walls, there existed a detail so subtle it evaded most eyes. Draco Malfoy, who stalked those passages with a posture too rigid to be natural, wore on his left hand a ring that caught the camera lens during the darker scenes of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. It was not an ostentatious ring, rather it seemed deliberately restrained, a thin band of silver with a crest engraved upon it, an ancient sigil of the Malfoy line. The camera's brief, lingering focus upon it happened most noticeably as Draco lingered by the vanishing cabinet, pale fingers resting on the edge, the ring glinting as though it had a secret of its own. It was a curious flourish to his costume design, not mentioned outright in dialogue, but planted there to deepen the viewer's sense of what Draco carried into his secret mission. When Narcissa Malfoy clasped her son's hands before she begged Severus Snape to make the unbreakable vow, her gaze flickered to the ring as if reminding Draco of everything at stake. The family's pride, the centuries of pure-blood heritage that coalesced into that simple piece of metal. The ring was not merely jewelry, it was a seal of belonging, a weight of expectation pressed onto Draco's skin. In the books, this emphasis was absent, but on film, the prop's presence served as a visual whisper, a symbol of the irony that defined his journey. He, the scion of a house obsessed with untainted lineage, had become a desperate pawn in a plan orchestrated by Lord Voldemort, who himself was a half-blood. When Draco moved through the room of requirement, testing the twin vanishing cabinets with an owl trembling in its cage, the ring appeared again in a fleeting shot. The bird flapped against his hand, and the ring's crest flashed, almost mocking in its refinement. In that moment, Draco looked older than 16. His lips pressed into a grim line, and the tension in his jaw suggested the ring's emblem weighed on him like a shackle. Perhaps as he gripped the cabinet's edge, he was thinking of how his father, Lucius Malfoy, had worn the same ring to intimidate ministry officials. Now Draco wore it not as a sign of power, but as a reminder that failure would bring ruin upon his family. In the chapter titled The Unknowable Room, the text describes Draco as gaunt and pale, his robes dishevelled, his manner secretive. Though the book never references the ring, the film's choice to spotlight it conjured a new layer of vulnerability. Here was the heir of Malfoy Manor, a boy who once sneered at Harry Potter's lack of pedigree, reduced to a frightened conspirator. Each time the camera paused to record that small band of silver, it underscored the contrast between the arrogance Draco once flaunted and the terror that now haunted him. On the astronomy tower, where Dumbledore waited calmly for his fate, the ring made its final and most poignant appearance. Draco's hand, trembling as he raised his wand, caught the moonlight. The ring's insignia, an ornate serpent curled around a Gothic M, glimmered just long enough to be recognized. It was the last vestige of the life Draco had been promised, a future of status and safety, secured by ancient bloodlines. But in that hour, even the emblem of his heritage could not steady his resolve. The boy's voice cracked as he confessed, "He told me to do it." Throughout the sixth film, the ring never becomes a centerpiece, and that is precisely why it is such a potent symbol. Only when a viewer is already familiar with the Malfoy family mythology does its significance emerge. A line from the second book, Chamber of Secrets, echoed strangely in this context. "Famous Harry Potter," Draco had once drawled, "can't even go into a bookshop without making the front page." At the time, his disdain was absolute. Yet here, years later, Draco was the one whose actions would be scrutinized, whose smallest gestures, down to the adornment of his hand, would carry life or death consequences. It is telling that Draco never removes the ring, even as his mission grows darker. He could have slipped it into a drawer, hidden it away, as if to disown his lineage while he colluded with Death Eaters, but he did not. Whether by pride or fear, he kept it visible, a talisman of a world he was desperate to protect. Even when he sobbed in the bathroom, clinging to the sink after nearly killing Katie Bell with a cursed necklace, the ring remained on his finger, a chilling counterpoint to his breakdown. In the final shots of the film, as Draco is ushered from the castle by Severus Snape, he glances back over his shoulder. His face is ashen, the defiance drained from his eyes. The hand with the ring is clenched into a fist. For all its inherited arrogance, the Malfoy crest now looked pathetic, a relic of a doomed house. In the books, Draco's cowardice is often condemned, but in this adaptation, the ring's silent testimony suggests he was not simply cowardly, he was a prisoner of a legacy he was never strong enough to renounce. Number 18, Cave Wall Inscriptions. Few who first watched Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince remember anything about the cave walls for their eyes were riveted on the black lake seething with inferi and the eerie basin in which the Horcrux lay hidden. But the stone itself held secrets, carved in a language so old that even Dumbledore's wandlight merely hinted at their existence. When the elder wizard guided Harry across the ledge, the film showed shadows moving on the pocked rock. Slowing the frames reveals lines of symbols, sharp-angled and serpentine, engraved as if by an obsessive hand. They were not random scratches. The runes, faint but deliberate, formed a lattice of protective magic, testament to the mind of Tom Riddle, who had come here decades earlier to seal a part of his own soul away from mortality. The runes themselves appeared to have been scorched into the basalt, etched with a precision suggesting both fear and pride. Voldemort did not trust any enchantment he did not understand, and so he forged his own, drawing on arcane lore predating Hogwarts itself. In the scene where Dumbledore lifts his arm to test the water for enchantments, the faint glow of the runes can be glimpsed beneath the surface of the stone, flickering as if alive. This detail, overlooked by almost everyone, adds another layer to the darkness of that cavern. It is not merely a hiding place but a shrine to Voldemort's unholy ambition. In the book, Dumbledore says, "Lord Voldemort will have made preparations. He will have put protections in place." Most readers think first of the potion that burns the throat or the inferi who will drag intruders to a watery grave. But the runic script on the walls was yet another snare. Riddle, who had learned more about ancient magical languages than any other student in his era, adapted symbols he found in old tomes, symbols of binding and confusion. As a boy in the orphanage, he had once stolen a brittle volume from Burke's shop, reading by candlelight until dawn. The runes in the cave were born from that night. Even the Ministry's archives contain no full record of the runic system Voldemort favoured, for it was a hybrid of Norse futhark and an archaic script used by Salazar Slytherin's ancestors. When Harry passed his wand near one etching, a spark flared, momentarily illuminating a sign resembling an eye with a slit pupil. It is said in some commentaries that this symbol was an invocation of watchfulness, a curse that recorded intrusions and perhaps even whispered them across the miles to Voldemort himself. The cave was not simply a vault, but a sentinel. The peculiar placement of the symbols suggests a deliberate logic. Voldemort etched them along the seams in the stone where magic could most easily flow. This technique, called vein-laying, was recorded in the scrolls of Herpo the Foul, whom Tom Riddle admired as a visionary. It is likely that before he ever conceived the Horcrux ritual, he had learned to mould protective spells into the living rock itself. In that damp chamber, he practiced and perfected this skill. The fact that the runes remained active decades later is a testament to their strength, and to the paranoia of the man who crafted them. The camera's movement in the film glances past these markings as Dumbledore staggers from the effects of the potion. Yet the presence of the runes tells a subtler story. Voldemort was not merely concealing his Horcrux, he was declaring mastery over the very place. As if to brand the cave his own domain, he laced it with runes that would repel any lesser wizard's efforts to intrude. One scholar, Caradoc Bane, suggested that even the boat across the lake moved at the whim of these markings, that the symbols governed its hidden mechanism. There is a passage in the 6th book when Dumbledore remarks, "Magic leaves traces." Nowhere is this truer than in the cave. The runes represent the traces of Voldemort's mind, each stroke a window into his need for control. When he returned here after murdering Hepzibah Smith and splitting his soul again, he must have traced each symbol with a kind of savage satisfaction. Every groove in the stone was an oath that no living thing would find this fragment of himself without paying a dreadful price. If you pause the film at the moment Harry raises his wand to scan the chamber, you will see a faint reflection of rune clusters behind him. Some resemble twisting snakes, others look like hooks or talons. These are not decorative, they are the written equivalents of curses. One cluster, near the ledge where Dumbledore drinks the potion, is theorized to be an obliviate spiral designed to sap intruders' memory of how they arrived. It is fortunate Dumbledore's experience was great enough to recognize these traps, even when he was weakened. The dark irony is that Voldemort learned of such magic not merely from books, but from conversations with the ghosts of Hogwarts. In his final year, he had questioned the Grey Lady about ancient runic wards. He presented himself as a scholar, eager to revive forgotten knowledge. Even she was deceived for a time. When he departed, he carried enough understanding to begin designing his own system. The cave became his laboratory, a place to engrave his genius in secret. A detail that underscores his obsession is that he chose to carve the runes himself. He could have used a wand to sear them instantly, but eyewitnesses from Knockturn Alley once described how he preferred a ritual dagger for certain incantations, believing the blood-like scoring increased their potency. In the film, the depth of the lines suggests precisely such manual effort. This was not hasty work. It was a ritual of ownership and fear, and it consumed days. When Dumbledore first approached the wall to trace one of the symbols with his finger, Harry watched in confusion. He could not see the faint lines without the Elder Wizard's spell to illuminate them. In the novel, Dumbledore's expression was grave and remote, as if he had glimpsed something older than any living memory. The runes were the quietest, most dreadful feature of the cave because they proved Voldemort did not merely borrow dark magic. He innovated it. It is remarkable that in the chaos of the film's climax, when inferi swarmed and Dumbledore struggled to resist their grasp, the camera framed the scene in such a way that the runes seemed almost to watch. Each marking, inert yet purposeful, was a witness to the unfolding struggle. They were the silent audience to Dumbledore's suffering and Harry's terror, a reminder that Voldemort had prepared for every possibility. Those who have studied the film closely notice that after Dumbledore conjures the ring of fire to drive back the inferi, the heat causes the runes to glow faint red. This was no accident of lighting. It symbolized that Voldemort's enchantments were sensitive to disturbance. The entire cavern was an organism designed to react with hostility to intruders. If Dumbledore had faltered, the runes themselves might have discharged fatal curses. Even the arrangement of the symbols suggests a mind that thought in layers. The outermost circle appears to be warnings. Closer to the basin are symbols for containment and concealment. The deepest layer, half hidden beneath lichen, is believed to be curses of final retribution, designed to ensure that if someone somehow succeeded in taking the locket, they would be marked forever. Voldemort was not content merely to hide the Horcrux. He wanted to brand its thief in body and soul. Many viewers are captivated by the terror of the inferi, by the potion that chokes and burns, but those who pause and look at the walls will understand that Voldemort's greatest weapon was his patience. He gave weeks to carving protective runes. He read dead languages that no teacher had required him to study. He labored alone in darkness, and in the end, every line in that stone became a testament to the horror of a man who wished to conquer death, not through courage or love, but through mastery and cruelty. Number 19, Borgin and Burke's Window. In the shadowed recesses of Knockturn Alley, Borgin and Burke's stands as a testament to the quiet persistence of the dark arts, a place whose windows gleam with objects so malicious in nature that even the Ministry of Magic has never fully catalogued them. When Draco Malfoy stepped through the crooked doorway in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, many readers and viewers naturally focused on the vanishing cabinet he so desperately sought to master. Yet just beyond that central thread of the narrative, the display window itself harbored its own sinister truths. Pressed against dusty panes of glass sat an array of cursed treasures that spoke to Voldemort's legacy more vividly than any whispered threat or half-seen gesture. Among them, Tucked almost carelessly behind a stack of rotting tomes lay a heavy silver hand that gleamed in the low light, its lifeless fingers curled as if in anticipation. One could easily overlook it, but in retrospect it seemed an unsettling echo of the silver hand that Voldemort himself conjured for Peter Pettigrew in the graveyard at Little Hangleton. Rowling writes that the shop was dimly lit, with a faintly nauseating smell, and that its shelves were crowded with objects that reeked of ill fortune. The silver hand in the display window, glinting like an omen, offered a subtle foreshadowing of Pettigrew's eventual fate. The moment Voldemort rewarded him for loyalty, he also marked him for betrayal and punishment. It is a detail so easily missed amid Draco's anxious bartering and the gloom of the place, but it reveals how closely Borgin and Burkes was entwined with Voldemort's rise and the personal fates of his followers. The hand was a prophecy in metal, a dark promise of the consequences that awaited even the most devoted servant who dared to waver. One might argue that such a detail was never accidental. Rowling planted it like a malignant seed, waiting for the reader to discover it long after the first telling. In that same window sat something perhaps even more compelling to the careful observer, a heavy locket of tarnished metal marked by an ornate serpentine design. This medallion, with its archaic engraving and dull glimmer, bore an unsettling resemblance to Salazar Slytherin's locket, later revealed to be a Horcrux containing a fragment of Voldemort's mutilated soul. While it is never confirmed explicitly in the narrative whether this was the genuine artifact or merely a clever imitation, its placement in Borgin and Burkes serves as a reminder of how Horcruxes moved unseen through the wizarding world. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore tells Harry that the locket was stolen from Hepzibah Smith's collection, and it is Borgin and Burkes that first handled it when Tom Riddle sold them the cup and locket in exchange for further knowledge. The locket in the window might be a remnant of that same inventory, a token of dark history displayed without apology. This quiet presence of a Horcrux, or something like it, shows how the shop was less a merchant of curiosities than a hidden artery of Voldemort's ambitions. Even the glass separating the objects from the street seemed too thin to hold back the currents of corruption emanating from them. When Harry and Ron later revisit Knockturn Alley under the invisibility cloak, the sense of dread in front of the window is palpable. Here were relics that had outlasted their owners, pieces of a world forever poisoned by the lust for immortality. The locket's resemblance to the one that would nearly tear apart Harry, Ron, and Hermione underscores how the past lingered in plain sight, ready to ensnare the unwary. In one of the earliest mentions of Borgin and Burkes, Draco Malfoy boasts to Harry in Chamber of Secrets that his father knew the shop well. Lucius Malfoy visited frequently, sometimes to sell items he wished to keep from the Ministry's scrutiny. It seems almost certain that Draco, following in his father's footsteps, was steeped in familiarity with every cursed object and concealed compartment in the place. When he entered that day in Half-Blood Prince, he did not merely stumble upon the vanishing cabinet. He moved with the assurance of someone who knew precisely where to look and what to demand. The medallion and the silver hand, arranged behind the glass-like museum exhibits, were old acquaintances to the Malfoy family. They were the trappings of a lineage that had always thrived on proximity to the dark arts. Throughout the narrative, Rowling draws a subtle line between the overt menace of Voldemort and the quieter, more insidious evil of places like Borgin and Burkes. The shop was a sanctuary for objects that corrupted not with a sudden curse, but with the slow erosion of conscience and caution. One can imagine Draco as a boy, pressing his pale face against that same glass, dreaming of power as he studied the locket and the hand, by the time he was tasked with repairing the vanishing cabinet. He was no longer an innocent observer. The details in the window were no longer curiosities, they were tools. The line between observer and participant had dissolved. The locket's presence in that window takes on a deeper significance in light of Regulus Black's attempt to destroy it. Readers learn in Deathly Hallows that Regulus replaced the original Horcrux with a decoy, leaving behind the note signed R.A.B. But in Half-Blood Prince, neither Harry nor the reader knows any of this yet. The locket in Borgin and Burke's becomes a symbol of everything hidden and unresolved. It is the shadow of Voldemort's paranoia and the relic of a war that most of the wizarding world preferred to forget. Even when Dumbledore spoke of Horcruxes, the reality of seeing something so similar in the mundane setting of a shop window created an unsettling collision between legend and life. Just as the silver hand foreshadowed Pettigrew's punishment, the locket hinted at a future obsession that would consume Harry and his friends. In Deathly Hallows, Hermione observes that the locket affects people in different ways and that it doesn't like to be near other Horcruxes. If it was truly the same locket, though that can never be proven, it spent years in Borgin and Burke's, radiating its corrosive influence into the very walls. Perhaps that is why the shop feels so oppressive and tainted. It is not merely the presence of cursed objects, but the unrelenting aura of Voldemort's fragmented soul. The medallion's resemblance to the Slytherin locket also reinforces how Voldemort's artifacts, like the man himself, were never far from those who admired him. The Malfoys, the Carrows, and the other Death Eaters all trafficked in these items. In a way, the locket behind the glass was a silent witness to a long parade of buyers and sellers, each more eager than the last to profit from the darkness. It was a reminder that Voldemort's power did not arise in isolation. It was fed by generations of wizards willing to barter conscience for advantage. Even the physical arrangement of the windows seems deliberate, as if the proprietors knew that the true connoisseurs of dark magic would recognize the significance of these items. Borgin and Burke's never needed flashy signage or garish advertising. Its reputation was secured by the quiet knowledge that within its walls lay artifacts of unimaginable consequence. The locket and the hand were trophies of the shop's long complicity in Voldemort's ascent, displayed not with reverence, but with the cold detachment of a merchant who knows their value. Harry's brief glimpse through the window, though overshadowed by Draco's maneuvers, underscores a larger truth that runs through the series. Evil does not always announce itself with fanfare. Often it waits behind glass, blending into the clutter until the moment it is needed. The silver hand waited for its master, the locket waited for its next owner. Borgin and Burke's waited for the war to return, as it inevitably would. To look again at that window is to see not just props, but a silent gallery of Voldemort's legacy. Each item testifies to the persistence of the past, the way dark deeds echo across years. It is easy to believe that if one pressed an ear to the glass, the locket might whisper in Parseltongue, or the silver hand might twitch in recognition. This is why Rowling's details are so devastating. They remind the reader that the horror is never truly gone, it merely finds new forms. While Harry and Dumbledore searched far and wide for clues to Voldemort's Horcruxes, here, in a crooked alley in London, sat an emblem of that quest waiting for someone to understand its meaning. It is a moment in the story when the line between ignorance and awareness was no thicker than a pane of dusty glass. And the tragedy is that no one recognized it in time. Number 20, the green flash. The tower loomed above Hogwarts like a silent witness to every triumph and every betrayal. On the battlements, beneath the fathomless dark sky, Severus Snape raised his wand with a motion that looked almost serene, his black eyes fixed on Albus Dumbledore. To many readers and viewers, the detail that lingered most vividly was not Snape's contorted expression or the terrible stillness in Dumbledore's gaze, but rather the sudden, searing flash of green. The colour burst forth like a poisonous flame, striking Dumbledore square in the chest, casting his silhouette in a pallid brilliance before his body slipped silently over the edge. This green was not simply a flourish of cinematography. It was the deliberate invocation of a colour whose meaning had trailed Harry Potter from his infancy to this pinnacle of tragedy. Throughout the series, green had appeared again and again as a herald of danger, of serpents, of the Slytherin legacy that hovered over every dark event. Voldemort himself had eyes described as red, but it was green that marked his most fatal signature, the Avada Kedavra curse. Rowling writes in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, a jet of green light shot from the end of Snape's wand and hit Dumbledore squarely in the chest. There is no ambiguity in this moment. It is the moment when the colour becomes the symbol of finality. It was not merely that Dumbledore died, but that the green flare heralded it in the same way it once signalled the deaths of Harry's own parents. One cannot overstate the cunning artistry in tying this hue to both Slytherin House and Voldemort's darkness. Slytherin's emblem was a serpent, the very creature whose venom could end life in silence. Its banner gleamed green and silver, colours that were never neutral but always whispering of ambition and danger. Even the Slytherin common room shimmered in greenish light beneath the lake, as if the water itself bled this hue. In the moment of Dumbledore's murder, the green flash was not only death incarnate but a final bitter echo of the Slytherin inheritance that had haunted Hogwarts for centuries. It is striking how this green flash of Avada Kedavra becomes the culmination of a long chain of colour symbolism. From the first book, when Harry looks into the mirror of Erist and sees the bright green eyes of his mother reflected in his own, green has been a harbinger of both love and destruction. Lily Potter's eyes are so often described as brilliant green that it almost feels deliberate that the same colour would later signal her death. Rowling did not invent that association lightly. It is the duality of green, life in the eyes of a mother, death in the bolt from a killer's wand, that gives this moment its unspeakable weight. The film adaptation emphasizes this visual language. When Snape's spell erupts in a blast of green, it is not the softer green of Lily's gaze, but the sickly, virulent colour that seems to belong to another realm altogether. Cinematographer Bruno Delbonnel saturates the scene in darkness so that the green appears unearthly, almost phosphorescent. It is an aesthetic decision, but it is also a narrative one. It shows viewers that this is not any curse. This is the curse, the killing curse, and the colour carries the memory of every time Voldemort has used it to extinguish a life. Consider the moment in Goblet of Fire when Harry faces Voldemort in the graveyard. Again, the green jet arcs across the darkness, striking Cedric Diggory down without even leaving a wound. The same unfeeling magic that destroyed a teenage boy in an instant now claims the greatest wizard alive. In each case, the green is the same. It is the visual shorthand for the one spell that cannot be blocked, the one spell that is pure, invincible finality. In Half-Blood Prince, there is a tragic irony in how calmly Snape pronounces the incantation. The book says only, Snape raised his wand and pointed it directly at Dumbledore. Avada Kedavra. The spell itself requires no flourish, no struggle. That simplicity makes the green more terrifying. It is a flash that requires no justification, no rage, only intention. And behind that intention, the colour tells us everything we need to know about Snape's supposed allegiance. To the gathered Death Eaters, to Draco Malfoy watching in frozen horror, it is the final proof that Snape belongs to them. To the reader, it is the moment when trust shatters like glass. The symbolism deepens when one recalls that Slytherin House is the birthplace of Voldemort's ideology. Slytherin's green banners once represented only cunning and ambition, traits that are not inherently evil. But through Voldemort's ascendancy, the colour has been forever tinted with a darker meaning. The green flash on the tower is a visual declaration that Slytherin's legacy has finally conquered Dumbledore's efforts to protect the school. It is no coincidence that the man casting the spell was once the Half-Blood Prince, a boy who mixed Slytherin pride with the bitterness of an outsider. This chromatic motif is not unique to Avada Kedavra. In Chamber of Secrets, when Harry confronts the basilisk, its scales gleam with a wet, glistening green. The basilisk is the monster of Slytherin himself, a serpent whose gaze kills as surely as the killing curse. Again, the colour is there, always hovering near the boundary between life and death. And it is no accident that the diary, another vessel of Voldemort's soul, bleeds a poisonous black-green ink when destroyed. The Slytherin green is a persistent stain on the story. In the climactic moment atop the astronomy tower, the green is also a betrayal of memory. For Harry, hidden and paralysed below the ramparts, the colour must recall his earliest nightmare. He has seen that flash in dreams in Dumbledore's pensive in Voldemort's face. To see it again, directed at the only man he ever truly trusted, is a reenactment of his own orphaning. The green is not just a killing spell, it is the loss of the last parental figure Harry had left. Some critics have argued that the green flash is merely a convenient device for spectacle, but when viewed within the pattern of the entire saga, it is evident that this is a culmination of a long visual vocabulary. The colour stands as a symbol of the one power Voldemort mastered beyond any other, the absolute extinguishing of life. The fact that Snape uses it, so coldly, so inevitably, marks the moment when every ambiguity about his loyalty becomes unbearable. Only much later does the reader learn that this green was a mercy, a reluctant fulfillment of an oath, but in the moment it is simply the final word. In a universe where colours often carry the emotional language of magic, the green of Avada Kedavra is the opposite of the red-gold warmth of Gryffindor or the silver-blue serenity of Ravenclaw. It is a corrosive, pitiless green, and Rowling chose it with care. It is why the filmmakers too preserved the detail, making sure that the green light remained unwavering and unmistakable. When Dumbledore's body falls, it is framed by the glow of that lethal colour, etching the moment into the minds of all who watch. It is perhaps telling that Voldemort's killing curse in the graveyard and Snape's killing curse on the tower are described almost identically in their visual effect. The symmetry is deliberate. Both spells mark the end of innocence. For Cedric it was youth and promise snuffed out without cause. For Dumbledore it was wisdom and protection cut short in the name of a larger design. In both cases, green is the final punctuation mark. One could even argue that this detail, easily overlooked in a first reading or viewing, is one of the most potent visual metaphors in the entire saga. It is the moment when Slytherin's colour consumes the last barrier to Voldemort's return. The flash of green is the end of Dumbledore's era, the beginning of the final struggle, and the culmination of every shadow that has stalked Harry since his infancy. Even without dialogue or exposition, the green speaks. Rowling understood that magic should never be purely abstract. By giving each spell a colour, she made the intangible tangible, but she also embedded in that colour the moral weight of each act. When Snape raises his wand and green surges forth, it is not only the light of a curse, it is the colour of every serpent carved into Slytherin's walls, every dark secret kept alive in Hogwarts' hidden chambers, every ambition that grew unchecked until it became lethal. And in that moment, for a heartbeat that seemed to last forever, the green was all that remained. Number 21, Harry's broken glasses. In the dimly lit corridors of Hogwarts, where portraits whispered secrets and candles flickered against ancient stone, there was a moment in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince that many first-time viewers scarcely noticed. As Harry leaned against a wall after a long day of lessons and private thoughts, his glasses, those familiar round frames that had perched upon his nose since he was 11, caught the torchlight and revealed a hairline crack splitting the left lens. They were slightly bent at the bridge, as though someone had grasped them in frustration, or they had fallen to the cold flagstones one too many times. This was not a random oversight or the result of careless prop management. It was a carefully placed detail, an emblem of Harry's slow, painful journey from boyhood into a world where the cracks in his perception would become impossible to ignore. In the earlier books and films, Harry's broken glasses were often a minor inconvenience, quickly mended with a flick of Hermione Granger's wand or the more experienced hand of Madame Pomfrey. The cheerful incantation Oculus Reparo had always made them good as new, but in Half-Blood Prince the fracture remains visible longer than usual, suggesting that some damage cannot be repaired instantly, that certain breaks are more than a surface flaw. The narrative had shifted. Harry was no longer the innocent child discovering magic with wonder. He was now a young man grappling with the shadows that came with knowledge. And loss. Those cracked lenses reflected the fault lines that were opening in his own spirit. When Dumbledore brings Harry to the cave in search of Voldemort's Horcrux, the boy, who had once faced danger with a kind of reckless courage, now carries visible signs of wear. His clothes are dusty from the journey, his hair dishevelled, and his glasses sit unevenly on the bridge of his nose, the crack etched like a scar across his field of vision. It is as if the damage to the glass mirrors the fissures in Harry's certainty. He is no longer sure what will remain unbroken by the time this war ends. In the text Rowling wrote, Harry felt as though the world had been knocked off its axis, and the fragile state of his glasses is a testament to this imbalance. Long before this moment, in Philosopher's Stone, the Dursleys delighted in breaking Harry's belongings, especially his glasses. Dudley would snatch them and hurl them out of reach, and Petunia would pretend not to notice. Back then, the damage symbolized the cruelty of his childhood. But in Half-Blood Prince, the cracked lens is no longer just a reminder of petty bullying, it is a sign of how far he has travelled into peril. When Draco Malfoy curses Harry and leaves him paralyzed under the invisibility cloak, it is a moment of betrayal and humiliation so profound that Harry cannot help but feel his world splitting open. The glasses he later retrieves from the bathroom floor are bent at precisely the same angle we see later, after he has washed Malfoy's blood off his hands and tried to compose himself. The broken glasses also echo the death that hovers over the story like a permanent shadow. Dumbledore's fate is already sealed by the cursed ring he destroyed, though Harry does not know it yet. When Harry stands beside Dumbledore's body on the astronomy tower, the wind whipping around them and the dark mark floating above, the cracked lens blurs part of his view. It is a simple, chilling metaphor. He cannot see the world clearly anymore. Part of him is obscured, out of focus. The glasses that had once allowed him to read, to find answers in books and scrolls, now refract the torchlight in a warped pattern. It is as though the certainty of his youth has been fractured beyond repair. Throughout the books, Rowling used the motif of broken glasses to show Harry's vulnerability. In Chamber of Secrets, after crashing the flying car into the Whomping Willow, his glasses are nearly smashed beyond recognition. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when the Dementors approach the Hogwarts Express, Harry's glasses fog and freeze, blinding him, but these were temporary hindrances quickly remedied. The difference in Half-Blood Prince is that the damage is more persistent, like a wound that refuses to heal. When Harry passes Slughorn's office, the professor remarks on his scruffy appearance, and for a moment Harry feels self-conscious, touching the bent frame as though it reveals more than he wants anyone to see. One particular evening, as Harry waits outside the room of requirement, hoping to catch Malfoy at his secret business, he lifts the cracked lens to the light, trying to see if the damage has worsened. The glass catches the torch flame and shatters the glow into a web of fine fractures, 1,000 splinters of illumination. In that instant, the reader can sense that Harry himself feels as if he is being split into fragments. Part of him still the hopeful boy, part of him the soldier who must prepare to lose everyone he loves. This image is not accompanied by any dramatic music or close-up in the film, but it lingers all the same, a silent emblem of a world that will not be whole again. Even when Hermione and Ron stand beside him, arguing over Lavender Brown and their own tangled affections, Harry's attention drifts to the damaged frame, as though it represents the crack that runs between all of them. They are trying to pretend that life goes on, that teenage squabbles and Quidditch tryouts still matter, but the broken glasses are proof that something irrevocable has changed. As the book says, he felt as though he were moving through some kind of dream, and the imperfect lens is the visual confirmation that the dream is broken. When he finally returns to Gryffindor Tower after the tragedy on the astronomy tower, he sets the glasses carefully on his bedside table and sits in silence. In the film, the camera lingers on the frame, the crack catching the last ember of torchlight before darkness swallows it. This small moment, almost invisible, is an elegy for Dumbledore. The man who had always seen further than anyone else is gone, and the boy who had relied on that wisdom is left to stare through shattered glass at an uncertain future. Perhaps the most telling detail is that Harry does not try to repair the glasses immediately. He could ask Hermione, whose magic is precise and unfailing, to mend them. He could go to Madame Pomfrey, who would scold him for letting them remain damaged, but he does not. For a time, he simply wears them as they are, cracked and imperfect. This is not out of neglect, but out of acceptance. The boy who once believed that every problem had a solution, that every injury could be healed with the right spell, is learning that some fractures must be carried. Even when Harry finally gathers his courage to face the funerals and the farewells, he is still wearing the same broken glasses. As he walks past Hagrid, past McGonagall, with her grief carefully hidden, the lenses remain cracked. They are a small defiance of the world's demand that everything look normal again. When Ginny Weasley takes his hand, she glances at them, her expression softening with understanding. They both know that something essential has changed and no magic can restore it to what it was. Afterward, in the quiet of Dumbledore's office, as the portraits mutter their condolences and Fawkes' song fades into silence, Harry finally takes the glasses off and sets them beside the pensive. He looks at them with a kind of sorrow he does not have words for, as though they hold the last reflection of a world that believed in safety. The crack across the left lens seems almost deliberate, like a final message. Nothing will ever be whole again. The broken glasses are not simply a prop or an accident. They are an emblem of Harry's story, of how every battle leaves its mark, of how clarity is sometimes fractured by grief. They remind us that to see the world clearly, you sometimes must look through the cracks, and when you do, you realize that those imperfections are the truest measure of everything you have endured. Number 22, Shadows on Snape's Face. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, there exists a subtle but potent detail that many first-time viewers easily overlook. As Severus Snape makes his unbreakable vow to Narcissa Malfoy in the dim drawing room of Spinner's End, a dark shadow slides across his sallow face, carving a line between light and darkness. It is more than an accident of candlelight. It is a deliberate visual metaphor that underscores the duplicity which defines Snape's existence. The cinematographer Bruno Del Bonell and director David Yates chose to heighten this motif throughout the film, especially in the scenes following Snape's fateful promise. When he swears to protect Draco, and, if necessary, to carry out Dumbledore's death himself, the darkness clings to him like an omen, foreshadowing the moral twilight he must inhabit. In one telling scene after Dumbledore's return to Hogwarts, Snape watches Draco slip furtively through the corridors. He stands at the end of the hall, his robes trailing the flagstone, and the torchlight falls unevenly over his face. One half is brightly illuminated, showing the implacable mask of authority he wears for students and staff. The other half dissolves into a deep shadow that hints at what Harry himself often suspects, that Snape is neither wholly loyal to Dumbledore nor fully committed to Voldemort. This interplay of darkness and light captures the paradox of a man whom Dumbledore once described as possessing a remarkable capacity for remorse. Even in the pages of The Half-Blood Prince, J.K. Rowling shows how the others perceive him as unreadable. "He wore a look of supreme indifference," the text observes, but the film's lighting tells a different story, suggesting that indifference is only a brittle facade. The shadow motif resurfaces during the climactic tower scene. As Dumbledore pleads weakly for Severus to fulfill their terrible agreement, Snape's face seems carved in stone, but the play of shadow betrays a tremor of emotion. In this moment, he is not simply the murderer he must pretend to be. He is the man torn between love and duty, sacrifice and survival. The camera lingers on his eyes as he raises his wand, and the shadow slants across his cheek like a scar. It is as though the darkness has finally claimed him. Yet even in this instant, viewers who look closely can see that the light never quite disappears. A thin line of brightness edges the side of his nose, reminding us that part of Snape remains uncorrupted by the deed he is about to commit. When Snape strides into the astronomy tower, he becomes both executioner and savior. Draco, who is frozen with terror, steps aside, and the faint flickering of torchlight along the tower wall throws Snape's profile into sharp relief. The left half of his face sinks into total darkness as he locks eyes with Dumbledore. The right side glows with a pale luminescence. This division of light is no random flourish. It is the film's most explicit declaration that Snape occupies the thin margin between monstrous betrayal and the most profound loyalty. In that single instant, every suspicion Harry harbored about Snape appears to be confirmed, and yet the audience is invited to question whether the darkness tells the whole story. Throughout The Half-Blood Prince, Harry repeatedly spies on Snape, hoping to catch him plotting Dumbledore's downfall. There is a moment in the potions classroom when Harry peers through the ajar door, and Snape is bent over a stack of essays. A lantern behind him casts his shadow across the blackboard. The outline of his head appears disproportionately large, looming over the names of students he must protect, mislead, and ultimately betray. Even in this mundane setting, the shadow asserts itself, a visual shorthand for Snape's burden as a double agent. The darkness that clings to him is not merely the darkness of evil, but the darkness of secret purpose. It is a darkness he has accepted, even embraced, to shield others from the very fate he seems to deliver. One of the most quietly devastating images in the film occurs after Dumbledore's death. As the students and staff gather in the courtyard, torches blaze around them, and Snape flees across the grounds. His figure slips through shafts of moonlight, but at no point is he fully illuminated. The camera watches him vanish into the darkness beyond the gates. This final glimpse reinforces the idea that his true nature is always obscured. He must remain in shadow because to step into the light would be to reveal every layer of his deception. In the book, Dumbledore once said, "You are a braver man by far than Igor Karkaroff." But on screen, it is the darkness itself that testifies to Snape's courage, a darkness he must carry alone. In another moment that rewards close attention, Snape stands in the headmaster's office, gazing at the pensieve. The window behind him lets in a cold, silvery light that outlines his silhouette. Yet as he turns, the shadows from the draperies slice across his face. They look almost like bars of a cage. Even while he occupies the seat of power at Hogwarts, Snape is a prisoner of promises. The visual echo of imprisonment makes this truth inescapable. He is bound to a path he did not choose, and the shadows are the visible markers of his confinement. Rowling's text gives clues to Snape's inner conflict, but the film's lighting design makes that conflict nearly tactile. When Bellatrix Lestrange tests Snape's loyalty, pressing him for assurances of his allegiance to Voldemort, the flicker of candlelight leaves one side of his face eerily serene and the other seething with darkness. The shadow splits him in two, suggesting that even as he utters words of loyalty to the Dark Lord, he secretly clings to another allegiance. "I have been loyal to you," Snape insists, but the contrast of light and dark implies the statement's precarious sincerity. When Harry challenges Snape in the corridor after Dumbledore's death, accusing him of cowardice, Snape's expression is an enigma. The torchlight reveals the tightness around his eyes, but half of his face is lost in darkness, as though it refuses to betray his torment. This ambiguity is central to Snape's story. The darkness is not only a visual cue to the viewer, but also a shield that prevents others from seeing the cost of his choices. Harry believes he sees a murderer fleeing justice, but the audience is shown the shape of a man who must disappear into shadow to protect what he loves. A poignant echo of this visual language appears when Snape stands before Dumbledore's portrait in the Deathly Hallows Part 2, but the seeds of that final revelation were planted in the Half-Blood Prince. The shadows on Snape's face were the first honest admission that his actions were never simple treachery. In one still frame, the camera captures a sliver of lamplight brushing his cheekbone, while darkness blankets the rest. This delicate interplay suggests that Snape's life was always a negotiation between concealment and revelation, between what he allowed the world to see and what he buried in darkness. The artistry of the lighting reaches its most powerful in the brief moment after Dumbledore falls from the tower. The camera cuts to Snape's face, the shadow swallowing nearly every feature except his mouth, which trembles in a fleeting flicker of grief. No dialogue could more eloquently convey the cost of that moment. The darkness here is both a mask and a confession, an acknowledgement that the role of executioner has scalded whatever hope remained in him. Even when Snape stands at the gates of Hogwarts, watching the Death Eaters march away, the visual motif persists. The moon's glow touches the edge of his shoulder, but his face remains in darkness, as if he cannot permit himself even the consolation of light. It is an image of a man who has crossed a threshold from which there is no return, and the shadows are the proof that he understands this better than anyone. The filmmaker's insistence on this shadow is a tribute to Rowling's creation of a character so layered that no single act can define him. To see Snape only as a villain, or only as a hero, is to ignore the profound complexity of his sacrifice. The darkness on his face is not just aesthetic, it is the closest the visual medium comes to admitting that his moral landscape cannot be understood in the blunt clarity of daylight. It is in the half-light, the flickering gloom, that Snape's truth emerges most clearly. Number 23. Color filters. The first time one watches Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the subtle color filters draped across nearly every scene might drift past unnoticed, overshadowed by the film's swelling music and the ever-thickening tension between Voldemort's forces and the wizarding world. But if one looks carefully, the entire movie is wrapped in a cold, greenish-grey palette, casting even familiar settings like the Gryffindor common room and Dumbledore's office in an unsettling, desaturated light. This visual choice, far from being a random flourish, quietly mirrors the decaying moral certainties of the characters who move through these spaces. When Professor Slughorn first appears in the cramped Muggle house he has been using as a hideout, the shadows and the pallor of the walls seem to leach warmth from the frame, suggesting that even the most genial of wizards is no longer untouched by dread. In the earlier films, Hogwarts stood tall and golden, bathed in warm light that made the castle feel like a fortress against darkness. By contrast, in Half-Blood Prince, the corridors gleam faintly with a sickly hue that makes every footstep echo with foreboding. Cinematographer Bruno Delbonnel and director David Yates understood that the wizarding world was losing its innocence. It is telling that when Harry follows Draco Malfoy to Borgin and Burke's, the grim antique shop feels almost the same color as the Forbidden Forest at midnight. The set pieces blend together in a dreary haze of grey and green, enforcing the sense that no place is truly safe, no corner truly lit. Even in the scenes that take place during daylight, the cold filters remain. The Quidditch tryouts should be full of energy, and indeed, Ron's clumsy triumph is played for laughs. Yet the grass of the pitch is dulled to a sallow olive, and the cheering crowd is cast in shadows. When Ron saves Gryffindor, the moment feels oddly brittle, as if no amount of victory can wash away the slow poisoning of the world. The book itself offers a line that foreshadows this pervasive unease. It was, he thought, the difference between being dragged into the arena to face a battle to the death and walking into the arena with your head held high. The film captures that reluctant march into darkness with every grey-toned frame. When Dumbledore visits Tom Riddle's orphanage in the past, the memory is one of the few places where warmer colours are allowed to flicker into view. The walls of the orphanage are still institutional, but the firelight in Mrs. Cole's office and the burnished tones of Dumbledore's travel cloak stand out as signs of life that has not yet been corroded. This contrast is essential. The past, even when filled with menace, still retains something vital, while the present has been drained of that vitality. It is a clever inversion of nostalgia. Here, the warmth of memory highlights the coldness of reality. The same effect emerges in Slughorn's recollection of the young Tom Riddle. When Harry finally convinces Slughorn to surrender the real memory, the screen shifts subtly. As the memory begins, the colours grow deeper, richer, as though even the horror of Horcruxes is more vivid than the lifeless drift of the current world. "You are Horace Slughorn," Harry reminds him. "You taught Voldemort." The line feels like an accusation, and the memory's vibrant golds and browns render it inescapably real. The viewer is forced to confront the idea that the past is more alive than the present. Throughout the film, whenever the story returns to scenes of instruction or camaraderie, the same cold filter reasserts itself. In the potions classroom, where Harry discovers the Half-Blood Prince's annotated textbook, the stone walls look more like damp cellar walls than the backdrop for magical learning. The text itself becomes a talisman of a vanishing age, an era when brilliance and curiosity were not yet overshadowed by dread. When Hermione frowns over the prince's spells, the pale green cast over her face makes her look almost spectral, as if she already belongs to the losses everyone is trying not to name. The cold filters also appear when Harry and Dumbledore travel to retrieve the Horcrux from the cave. Here, the desaturated greens deepen further, blending into blue. As they cross the freezing water and enter the vast cavern, the colour is so stripped away that the Black Lake looks more like oil than water. Even the fire that Dumbledore conjures in a last act of defiance burns in a strange, muted glow. The colours resist warmth, no matter how fiercely it is summoned. It is as though the entire film is reminding us that some evils cannot be purged by any light. Consider the small, unassuming detail of the Gryffindor common room fireplace, once a symbol of safety and hearth. In earlier films, the flames leaped in bright orange, reflecting off the red and gold tapestries. Here, when Harry and Ginny share their uncertain closeness, the fire glows weakly, casting more shadow than illumination. It is a visual echo of the line from the book. It was hard to say where Hogwarts ended and the darkness began. The film captures this blurring of borders so perfectly that even love scenes feel fragile and transient. At times, the cool filters seep into character interactions in a way that shapes their emotional weight. When Draco stands in the room of requirement, practicing the vanishing cabinet, he looks as pale as the cabinet itself. The greenish tint around him seems to swallow what little youth he has left. It is a deliberate visual metaphor for his slow surrender to Voldemort. Even when he tries to look defiant, the colours betray him, painting him in the palette of decay. The cinematography's refusal to allow true warmth becomes most noticeable in the Astronomy Tower sequence. As Dumbledore pleads with Draco, the moonlight is washed with cold green, so the scene almost looks underwater. The moment when Severus Snape appears and the inevitable unfolds is filmed without a trace of comforting gold. Severus! Please! Dumbledore's last words, already drained of hope, are framed in a colour so lifeless that the death feels like the last ember in the hearth going cold. No funeral pyre could reignite it. Perhaps the most affecting example of this technique comes in the small, silent scene after Dumbledore's fall. The camera pulls back to show the assembled students holding their wands aloft, their light battling the darkness. Yet even in this moment of shared grief and defiance, the cold filter remains. The beams of light are one, as if each student's courage is but a fragile protest. The film seems to whisper that this world is now beyond simple illumination, that the age of shadows has finally arrived. When the film occasionally lets warm hues return, it is only in memory or fantasy. Slughorn's Christmas party glimmers briefly in softer tones, but the moment is undercut by anxiety. Every warm lamp seems to flicker as if it might go out. The recollections of the younger Tom Riddle stand out not just because they are memories, but because they are memories of a time before the world cracked apart. Even then, the warmth is temporary. The moment the memory ends, the present returns, colder and more depleted. The colour filters work almost like a spell themselves. They create an unspoken understanding that the fight against Voldemort is not only fought in battles and curses, but in the gradual erosion of hope. Each familiar location is transformed by the same sickly tint. The burrow burns against a sky so grey that even fire loses its comforting power. The Great Hall is less a sanctuary and more a hollow chamber echoing with omens. These choices are more than atmosphere, they are an argument about the costs of war. For a viewer willing to notice it, the film's greenish-grey palette becomes a silent narrator, telling us what the characters themselves can't yet admit. Hogwarts is no longer the last refuge. Its walls, once golden, now absorb the darkness seeping in from every corner. It was the end of an era, the book insists. The film shows it more eloquently than any line of dialogue could. It proves that sometimes the most important truths are told not in words, but in the colours that soak the world. Number 24, Dark Mark in the Clouds. The opening moments of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince establish a mood that is at once ominous and unmistakable in its intent. As the camera sweeps over London, there is a creeping sense that something unnatural lurks within the folds of the grey sky. Few viewers notice it at first glance, but for a single instant, drifting in the haze of smoke and clouds, the dark mark emerges, serpentine and skeletal, its emerald glow diluted by daylight, yet still pulsing with a malevolent presence. This fleeting glimpse is not a mere embellishment of special effects. It is an unmistakable declaration that Voldemort's power is no longer confined to whispered rumours or hidden corners of the wizarding world. His reach has begun to encroach on the everyday life of Muggles, and the Dark Mark becomes a symbol of that transition. When the Death Eaters, led by Bellatrix Lestrange and Fenrir Greyback, begin their coordinated assault on Diagon Alley, and then extend their violence into Muggle London, the mark in the sky signals a strategy more chilling than simple destruction. In the book, Rowling wrote, the Dark Mark was a sign of terror, a symbol that Voldemort's followers had murdered wherever it appeared. Though in the film adaptation this detail is rendered almost subliminal, it is a critical part of the narrative. For even as store windows explode in a rain of glass and shrieks echo through the alleys, the mark hangs overhead, silent but potent, reminding every witch, wizard, and unsuspecting Muggle that these attacks are an announcement, a theatre of fear to herald the Dark Lord's resurgence. There is a carefully calculated cruelty in placing the dark mark over the city. It is not an indiscriminate flourish, but rather an echo of past atrocities. In the First Wizarding War, the dark mark would appear over the homes of those Voldemort's followers had slaughtered. Here, however, it drifts among clouds over entire city blocks, making the whole of London the site of the message. A child clutches her mother's hand on the Millennium Bridge as the Death Eaters spiral past in black vapour. Somewhere above them that emblem glows in the swirling sky, almost invisible but nevertheless anchoring the terror in something specific, something that has history. Anyone who has lived through Voldemort's previous reign of terror knows this mark means death will follow. One of the film's most subtle yet unsettling qualities lies in how it depicts the way fear can pass from one generation to the next. Arthur Weasley once explained the significance of the dark mark in Goblet of Fire. You know who and his followers sent the dark mark into the air whenever they killed. The symbol became a warning. This inherited dread becomes a kind of legacy, passed from parents to children like an heirloom no one wishes to claim. In Half-Blood Prince, that moment when the mark hovers over the Thames binds the new wave of attacks to old nightmares, ensuring that even those too young to remember Voldemort's first rise can now learn the shape of fear. The cinematography is deliberate in its restraint. Unlike the enormous skull and snake that fills the sky after the murder of Charity Burbage in Deathly Hallows, this mark is more diffused, less literal, like a phantom superimposed on the storm clouds. It almost requires the audience to lean closer, to wonder whether they have truly seen what they thought they did. This uncertainty is its own kind of horror, echoing the psychological toll of Voldemort's tactics. He has always thrived on doubt as much as terror. The question of whether the mark is real or an illusion magnifies the sense that nowhere is safe and nothing can be trusted. In Hogsmeade, the same haze drifts over the rooftops as the Death Eaters abduct Ollivander from Diagon Alley, when Fenrir Greyback smashes the display window and Bellatrix sends fireworks of green flame billowing across the cobblestones. The mark in the sky can be glimpsed again for an instant, framed by a collapsing chimney. For viewers scanning the screen for familiar symbols, it is a moment of grim recognition, like seeing a ghost step out of legend. And yet it's easy to miss. The filmmakers relied on that elusiveness to amplify the effect. The dark mark's partial visibility makes it all the more unsettling, like something you spot in the corner of your eye but cannot be sure was ever truly there. The attack is not only on brick and mortar, but on the collective sense of security that Wizarding Society had begun to rebuild since Voldemort's first defeat. When the mark drifts above London, it contaminates the very air with menace, leaving no boundary between the Wizarding and Muggle worlds. In the book, Rowling described the mark's sinister simplicity, a skull with a serpent protruding from its mouth. Here, it becomes less a drawing in the sky than an impression, an atmospheric stain that lingers in the clouds like a bruise on the horizon. The shape signals to anyone watching that Voldemort's ambitions are total. There will be no hiding from the storm he intends to unleash. Draco Malfoy's role in the film also finds an unspoken resonance in that mark. Though Draco has yet to commit the most terrible of the tasks set for him, the dark mark's presence in the sky mirrors the private torment that has begun to consume him. He is marked as well, though his brand is hidden beneath the sleeve of his robes. As the clouds above London shimmer with Voldemort's symbol, Draco's own initiation into the Death Eaters is a more intimate form of the same horror, a brand of ownership that transforms every choice into an act of surrender. His story in Half-Blood Prince unfolds under the shadow of that mark, both literally and figuratively. Viewers who watch the sequence carefully might notice how the mark seems to dissipate only when the Death Eaters vanish in curls of black smoke. The timing is deliberate. It is as if the mark itself requires their presence to maintain its form. The sky reclaims its neutrality only after the attackers have departed, but the damage remains. Buildings in ruins, people injured, and a memory of something monstrous moving above them. Even the Muggles, unaware of the dark mark's meaning, recoil from the unnatural storm. That recoil is precisely the reaction Voldemort intends. Whether or not they understand what they saw, they will carry the impression that the world has shifted, that something wicked has broken free. In a later scene, when Harry stands in the Burrows field and looks up at the winter sky, there is no mark above him, but the memory of it lingers. It is this contrast that gives the earlier glimpse of the dark mark its power. The clear sky becomes a fragile reprieve rather than a reassurance. Viewers know that it could reappear at any moment. The absence of the mark is not safety. It is merely the interval between attacks. The Death Eaters' tactics combine spectacle and psychological warfare. By attacking the Millennium Bridge and Diagon Alley in quick succession, they demonstrate that Voldemort's reach is as wide as it is lethal, yet it is the dark mark that gives these assaults their cohesion. Without it, the violence might be dismissed as random. With it, every broken window and collapsed archway becomes part of a larger design. The mark draws a line of continuity from the murders of the First War to the terror of the present moment, stitching all these wounds together in a single pattern. In this way, the dark mark serves not only as Voldemort's calling card, but also as a kind of prophecy, an omen that more devastation will follow. As Hermione once observed in the book, it was a sign that the Death Eaters had been there. This sign, drifting almost invisibly above London, confirms that no one is beyond Voldemort's attention. It is an announcement of intent, the promise that the old terror has returned, refined and emboldened. The moment is all the more chilling for its subtlety. Those who miss it during their first viewing may only sense that something in the sky felt wrong, that the light looked sickly, that the clouds were too quick to swallow the mark. On a second viewing, the recognition snaps into focus, the serpent and skull, the unmistakable signature of the Dark Lord, lurking in plain sight. The effect is like discovering that a nightmare you tried to forget was waiting for you all along, just out of reach. The filmmaker's choice to make the mark so difficult to spot is a testament to the craft that underlies the story's atmosphere. They understood that true horror does not always announce itself in broad strokes. Sometimes it glides at the edge of perception, a phantom imprint on the sky that makes every other moment feel tainted by the possibility of its return. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the dark mark in the clouds is a perfect embodiment of that philosophy, an omen you cannot unsee once you have found it. Number 25, candelabrum in Dumbledore's office. During the pivotal scenes in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, when Horace Slughorn returns to Hogwarts at Albus Dumbledore's gentle urging, a curious object sits almost unnoticed in the headmaster's office. It is a heavy brass candelabrum, shaped with two interlacing serpents that spiral around the base and climb up toward the candle branches. This detail does not command immediate attention, overshadowed by the swirling pensive and the delicate silver instruments puffing wisps of smoke on Dumbledore's shelves. Yet for the reader or viewer who lingers on it, the candelabrum feels almost unsettling in its elegance. The serpents are too vivid, their scales etched in a way that suggests deliberate artistry, not merely casual ornament. It is as though Dumbledore, master of symbolism, positioned this artifact precisely where it would watch over every guest who sat across from him. J.K. Rowling never explicitly writes in the text, the candelabrum with snakes revealed Dumbledore's fascination with Slytherin, but she fills the series with quiet signals that the headmaster harboured a respect for the cunning and ambition associated with that house. The office itself is a reflection of Dumbledore's vast curiosity. Books stacked in odd towers, telescopes left askew after late-night observations, glass cases protecting curious trinkets. Yet the candelabrum seems more than a mere curiosity. Its sinuous shapes evoke Salazar Slytherin's emblem, the serpent, and in doing so remind the observer that Dumbledore's battle with Voldemort was as much intellectual as it was moral. It is easy to imagine that he kept that symbol of the serpent close to prompt himself never to underestimate the capacity for darkness or the possibility of redemption. During one moment when Harry Potter enters the office to speak with Dumbledore about the memories they have collected from Slughorn, the camera in the film adaptation glides past this artifact. Candlelight glitters along the serpents' brass bodies, as though they are watching the boy who survived. The effect is almost subliminal, but it strengthens the mood of that chamber, a place where past and present collide, where Dumbledore keeps reminders of all he has studied, including the House of Slytherin and all it represents. The same room once sheltered Tom Riddle, who, when called there as a student, displayed a polished charm that masked a hunger for power. It is no coincidence that Dumbledore's office retained a relic evocative of Riddle's origins. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore tells Harry, "I have been hoping for years to find the final pieces of information that might lead us to a better understanding of Lord Voldemort." This statement resonates when you look at the candelabrum. Dumbledore never dismissed Slytherin's legacy as mere villainy. He recognized that Voldemort had grown from soil tilled by Hogwarts itself, by a house that valued ambition, resourcefulness, and a certain cold intellect. The serpents coiled around the candles seem to embody that duality. They can either shed light or strike with venom. Dumbledore kept that truth visible, though hidden in plain sight, so he would never forget the house's role in shaping both heroes and monsters. Even when he dined with Slughorn, whose fondness for Slytherin students was notorious, Dumbledore never allowed himself the comfort of believing Slytherin produced only darkness. The candelabrum may have been a quiet challenge to Slughorn's complacency, a reminder that their shared responsibility as educators was to see beyond reputation. Slughorn adored collecting promising protégés, Tom Riddle foremost among them, and was haunted by the consequences. Dumbledore, in contrast, studied the symbols of Slytherin not to indulge nostalgia, but to comprehend how a clever orphan became the most feared dark wizard in living memory. When the candelabrum's candles burned low, they cast shadows across the office walls, and the serpents appeared to twist and writhe. In those hours, when the headmaster sat alone pondering the fragments of Riddle's past, it is easy to imagine that he glanced at those brass serpents and reminded himself that understanding Voldemort required understanding Slytherin itself. The House of the Serpent was a crucible of potential, some noble, some poisonous. This duality haunted Dumbledore's efforts to persuade Slughorn to surrender his true memory, the memory that would reveal the creation of Horcruxes. Harry never remarked on the candelabrum, but the detail was likely known to him, just as he was aware of the sword of Gryffindor glittering inside its glass case. For a boy so shaped by Gryffindor values, the serpent iconography might have seemed out of place. But in Dumbledore's worldview, no house's legacy could be ignored. Every symbol in that office, from the phoenix on the perch to the serpent coiled in brass, testified to his conviction that knowledge, not judgment, was the first step toward victory. In Slughorn's presence, the candelabrum seemed almost like an accusation. Slughorn preferred to pretend that Tom Riddle had merely been an unusually bright boy, rather than a creature in whom Slytherin's ambition had curdled into cruelty. The serpents encircling the candles were a silent reminder that brilliance untempered by conscience was the most dangerous of all gifts. Slughorn's unease in Dumbledore's office may have stemmed less from guilt alone than from this unspoken reckoning with the ideals he once praised in Riddle. Rowling's writing is filled with such quiet symbols. When Dumbledore stood in that office, frail but unbowed, instructing Harry on the dangers of Horcruxes, he spoke of Voldemort in a tone mingling sorrow and pity. "You are forgetting the next moment when he asked me whether I would teach him," Dumbledore said in The Half-Blood Prince. "I told him that I did not think I could." This regret emanates from every artifact in that room. The candelabrum is not merely decor, it is a testament to the headmaster's conviction that even Slytherin's darkness deserved study, and that perhaps in understanding it, he could have saved more souls from being lost. Throughout the narrative, the serpent imagery recurs. In the Chamber of Secrets, in the Slytherin locket, in Nagini's sinuous menace. Yet this single candelabrum differs because it was a choice. Dumbledore chose to keep it in his sanctuary to let the symbol of Slytherin's house be part of his daily contemplation. For a man who valued tolerance above prejudice, this was an act of moral discipline. He refused to cast Slytherin out of sight, even as he fought to destroy the greatest monster it produced. In the final days of Dumbledore's life, as he prepared Harry for the inevitable confrontation with Voldemort, that candelabrum must have stood as an unspoken witness to his failures and triumphs alike. Its snakes did not judge, but their presence reminded him that the path to darkness begins with small choices, ambition nurtured without compassion, cunning unchecked by love. Dumbledore, who once turned away Tom Riddle, still bore the question of whether understanding had come too late. The serpents watched as he entrusted Harry with the final tasks of destroying Horcruxes. It is easy to overlook such a detail when reading the books or watching the films. The audience is drawn to the more obvious symbols: Fawkes the Phoenix, the sorting hat, the pensive, swirling with silvery memories. But that candelabrum holds a subtler lesson. Dumbledore never stopped believing that the House of Slytherin was capable of producing not only monsters, but also heroes. The fact that Severus Snape, a Slytherin, would ultimately become the most courageous spy in the wizarding world vindicated this belief. In the end, when Dumbledore fell from the astronomy tower, the candelabrum remained behind, its serpents twined around their candles, indifferent to the chaos that followed. It remained as a symbol that the war against Voldemort was never a war against Slytherin itself. It was a war against the corruption of ambition without conscience. In the quiet aftermath of Dumbledore's death, perhaps Minerva McGonagall, inheriting that office, paused to consider whether to leave the candelabrum in place. One suspects she did, out of respect for what it meant, an acknowledgement of the darkness that can live inside any house, and the hope that even serpents can sometimes be tamed. Number 26, Inferi Hands. In the suffocating darkness of the cave where Harry Potter and Albus Dumbledore ventured in pursuit of the locket Horcrux, the infernus rose in a shivering tide of limbs and pallid faces. The scene in the film adaptation of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince unfolded with such visceral horror that most viewers could scarcely process the details beyond the sudden eruption of cadaverous shapes. It was easy to be overwhelmed by the spectacle. Dozens upon dozens of corpses thrashing out of the black water, their hollow sockets locked on the living intruders. Yet for all their massed dread, a smaller, more dreadful truth flickered at the edges of perception, a truth that only reveals itself when one dares to look at the infernus's hands. Some were long-fingered and broad, but others were startlingly small, the bone-white knuckles no bigger than a child's. This detail, so easy to miss in the chaos, hints at a deeper cruelty in Voldemort's heart, a cruelty so absolute it devoured innocence without a second thought. In Rowling's novel, Harry's terror is palpable, described in lines that tremble with revulsion. The inferi were pressing in on him, cold hands clutching at his arms and neck, trying to drag him under the surface. While the prose dwells on their hunger and coldness, the film dared to show what the page could only imply. As Harry wrestled free of their grasp, his torchlight swept across a creature no taller than his chest. Its face had been half eroded by time and water, but the remaining skin stretched over. The delicate bones of a child, its hands, when they clamped on his robes, looked like the small, unblemished hands of a schoolmate. Here, Voldemort's unspeakable depravity became clear. He had not cared whose corpse he enchanted. Adult or child, it was all the same raw material for his army of the dead. When Dumbledore ignited the great ring of fire to drive the inferi back, the flames revealed the uneven proportions of those reaching through the smoke. One figure at the water's edge wore the tatters of a woman's gown, and beside her a smaller inferius clutched her arm as though seeking comfort in undeath. These details were not random costume choices, but deliberate reminders that the cave was no mere graveyard. It was a monument to Voldemort's willingness to desecrate any body, no matter how small or beloved, in his quest for immortality. In that pitiless conflagration, the audience glimpsed that no line existed Voldemort would not cross. In the studio notes for the film, concept artists described how they designed the inferi with differing heights and limb proportions to emphasize the horror that no age was spared. The sculptors crafted molds based on children's skeletons as well as adults, layering silicone skin over the frames to achieve a grotesque realism. The production designer, Stuart Craig, mentioned in an interview that they wanted viewers to feel, even if only subconsciously, that these were not a single type of enemy but a tragic mass of lost lives. We wanted the audience to sense, on some instinctive level, that Voldemort did not discriminate, Craig explained. And indeed, when you pause the film at the moment Harry is almost dragged under, you can see a small, pale foot beside his face, far too small to have belonged to a grown wizard. This unsparing inclusion of children among the inferi resonates with the larger theme of Voldemort's disregard for humanity. Throughout the series, he is repeatedly shown as someone for whom death is merely a tool to inspire fear or gain advantage. When he murders Bertha Jorkins and Frank Bryce, he does so without hesitation or regret. But the notion that he would ransack the bodies of dead children for dark magic suggests a moral decay that transcends even murder. As Dumbledore warns Harry in the cave, it is the unknown we fear when we look upon death and darkness, nothing more. Yet Voldemort's darkness was of a kind so absolute that it transformed death itself into a spectacle of unending horror. The moment the inferi first appear in the film is carefully orchestrated to create shock. The water lies flat and silent while Harry scoops potion into the goblet, his every movement echoing across the cavern. Then, from that placid surface, a single hand emerges. It is slender, the fingers curled as if in slumber, but as it closes around Harry's wrist, the hand reveals itself as the vanguard of a legion. Other hands break the water, large, small, gnarled, soft, and in that instant, the viewer receives the dreadful realization that Voldemort's spell has bound together all manner of the deceased. Some were likely criminals, others were ordinary people who died without understanding their bodies would be claimed for such a vile purpose. Among all the inferi, the child-sized ones are the most chilling. A fully grown, decomposing corpse is terrifying by nature, but there is something uniquely obscene in seeing a child's remains animated in service to a tyrant's will. One particular inferius, visible for just a few seconds as it crawls over a rock toward Harry, has limbs so thin they look scarcely strong enough to lift its own skull. Yet its grip is strong, relentless. Voldemort's magic had not only violated the dead, but compelled them to hunt the living with a hunger they never possessed in life. In the book, the narrative does not describe every inferius individually, but it does include a line that resonates with this interpretation. They were dead bodies, bodies that had been bewitched to do Voldemort's bidding. The word bodies, rather than men or corpses, suggests the same indiscriminate approach. Anyone who perished within Voldemort's reach could be remade as a weapon. The scriptwriters and designers for the film seized upon this, expanding the visual language to show plainly that even the smallest victims were not exempt from desecration. The firestorm Dumbledore conjures to repel the inferi also illuminates the truth that the only power Voldemort respects is fear itself. The swirling flames catch the blank, milky eyes of every creature in the cave, and as the smaller inferi turn to flee, the viewer can almost believe they possess some lingering trace of their lost humanity. But they do not. The magic has stripped away any memory or innocence. The tiny hands scrabble at the rocks with the same frantic desperation as their towering brethren. No soul remains to be saved. The spell has made them tools, pitiless, unthinking, and yet grotesquely familiar in form. What makes this detail so easy to miss is precisely what makes it so dreadful. When the scene is in motion, the eye sees only a mass of pale limbs and skeletal faces. But when you pause or slow the footage, when you force yourself to look with unflinching attention, you see what Voldemort has wrought, a vision of death that spares no one, that draws no line between the innocent and the guilty. The hand that clutched Harry's sleeve could just as easily have belonged to a child, torn from a family, buried without ceremony, and conscripted into the Dark Lord's perverse army. For viewers familiar with the books but not the films, this visual detail may come as a shock. The novels always hinted at Voldemort's total lack of scruple, but to see it rendered in such physical form, hands of all sizes pale in the firelight, cements the realization that he was not merely a murderer. He was a violator of the dead, a sorcerer so obsessed with control that he would not leave even a child's remains in peace. It is a testament to the filmmakers' commitment that they captured this horror so precisely, even if most audiences could not bear to look long enough to notice. The presence of these childlike inferi also underscores the tragic futility of Voldemort's pursuit of immortality. For all his efforts to defy death, he was ultimately defined by it, by his fear of it, his refusal to accept it, and his willingness to commit unspeakable acts to hold it at bay. When Harry saw those tiny hands reaching for him, he glimpsed the price of that obsession, a world in which nothing was sacred, not even the repose of the innocent. Voldemort's horror was not merely in his killings, but in his desecrations, his perverse insistence that every death could be bent to serve his own survival. It is telling that Dumbledore alone seems to understand the full scope of this atrocity. His voice is steady even as the inferi swarm them, and his magic flares not merely as a shield, but as a final kindness, a cleansing fire to drive the dead back to their rest. In that moment, the flickering shadows of children's bones dance across the cavern walls, a vision as pitiful as it is terrifying. Voldemort may have summoned them to terrify intruders, but it is their tragedy that endures longer than the fear. Number 27, torn poster in Nocturne Alley. Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince is often remembered for its darkening tone, the tightening grip of Voldemort on the wizarding world, and the personal losses Harry endures. But there is a tiny, nearly imperceptible detail during Harry's brief visit to Diagon Alley that many viewers overlook. An old torn poster on a shop door, warning about the registration of Muggle-borns and half-bloods. It flickers into view for only a moment as Harry and the Weasleys walk grimly through a street once bright with magic, now nearly abandoned. This single, easy-to-miss sign marks the early stages of a systematic terror that would soon become policy under Voldemort's regime. In that second, the film signals the transition from individual acts of violence to institutionalized persecution, offering a prophetic glimpse of the horror that will overtake Wizarding Britain by the next installment. The camera doesn't dwell on the sign. In fact, it is easy to miss entirely unless you pause the frame or happen to be scanning the edges of the scene. Harry is distracted, peering at the boarded-up shops, his eyes wary for signs of Death Eaters. The sign is ripped, partially obscured, but the words registration and Muggle-born can just be discerned. It's a warning: register or be punished. For a world that prides itself on magical wonders and old traditions, this is a shocking bureaucratic evil masquerading as law and order. It's a chilling reminder that the wizarding world, for all its beauty, is vulnerable to the same darkness that has plagued the non-magical world. J.K. Rowling's books don't describe this poster in the same literal way as the film does, but the idea of this quiet, creeping menace is deeply faithful to her narrative. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, she writes, "These were dangerous times, there was no doubt about it, and Harry was more aware than ever that the walls of Hogwarts were no longer a guarantee of safety." The film visualizes this danger spreading beyond Hogwarts in subtle, insidious ways. That poster, is the early bureaucracy of terror, a warning that Voldemort's supporters are no longer content to kill in alleys and fight in shadows. They are preparing to govern, to legislate hate, to normalize fear. Diagon Alley itself is the perfect stage for this creeping dread. Once a bustling place of commerce, wonder, and childlike awe, it is nearly deserted. Ollivanders has been ransacked, shops are shuttered, windows broken. There is a sense of decay that Harry cannot fail to notice, though he does not speak of it. The poster, flapping in the breeze, half-torn, is emblematic of the collapse of trust. This wasn't just a battle of wands, but a corrosion of society. The sign's existence suggests that even before the Ministry falls, parts of the magical government or local authorities have begun collaborating, helping identify the vulnerable so they can be targeted later. The poster doesn't need to scream its message. Its very presence whispers complicity. This detail is all the more disturbing because it feels so ordinary, so bureaucratic. Evil here is not Voldemort cackling or Bellatrix Lestrange casting the Cruciatus curse. It's a quietly printed notice pinned to a door. It doesn't shock you immediately. It looks like any other dull government mandate until you read the words. That's what makes it so frightening. It's the same mundane evil that has marked the darkest moments of Muggle history. The wizarding world, always so keen to distinguish itself from Muggle prejudices, reveals itself just as susceptible to systemic cruelty. Harry's reaction to Diagon Alley's decay is subdued but heavy. He doesn't speak of the sign, the film doesn't make him notice it directly. Yet his silence is meaningful. He walks quickly, jaw tight, shoulders hunched. He sees Fred and George's joke shop as the last flickering light in a darkened street. The camera lingers on their bright windows like a dying ember of hope. But even here, the world is changing. Harry feels it, even if he can't put it into words. The poster is not just for the Muggle-born, it's for people like Harry too, a half-blood, the chosen one, marked for death. Even he cannot hide from the new laws that will soon come. The sign foreshadows the events of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, where the Ministry falls under Voldemort's control. By then, registration is no longer a warning but enforced policy. Muggle-borns are hunted, interrogated, imprisoned, and their wands confiscated. In the book, Rowling writes, Muggle-born registration commission with deliberate coldness. Hermione must disguise herself to avoid arrest. The film's sign is a grim seed planted in half-blood prints that will bloom into full horror. It's cinematic storytelling at its finest, suggesting rather than shouting, letting the viewer's mind fill in the terror. That poster is more than a prop. It's world-building that shows how totalitarianism doesn't arrive with a bang. It creeps in slowly, quietly. It begins with rumors, then a small law, then posters, then arrests, then disappearances. Voldemort's regime didn't invent these tactics, they merely perfected them for magical society. That makes the poster in Diagon Alley so powerful. It's a historical echo. It reminds us that the wizarding world is not immune to the worst of human tendencies, despite its spells and potions. Harry's journey through the alley is thus more than a simple scouting mission for supplies or information. It is an unspoken goodbye to the innocence he once knew. The first time he visited Diagon Alley, he was wide-eyed with wonder, gaping at Gringotts, marvelling at the wand shop, enchanted by the ice cream parlour. Now he sees shutters, darkness, and propaganda. That single tattered sign is the gravestone of that innocence. It proclaims that even the most magical of places can be corrupted, can become tools of fear. The brilliance of this cinematic choice is that it doesn't insist you see it. It trusts attentive viewers to catch it. That quiet confidence gives the sign more weight. It is a message for those willing to look closer. For those who remember that Voldemort was once Tom Riddle, a boy who learned to hide in plain sight, manipulate and charm, his followers have learned the same. They hide their evil in formal decrees and official notices, pretending to be lawful even as they plan mass persecution. For Hermione Granger, a Muggle-born herself, that sign is a personal threat. Though she is not in this particular scene, the poster is her future nightmare. It predicts the Ministry's betrayal of its citizens, the show trials she will narrowly escape. Rowling describes such moments with chilling understatement. Hermione shuddered. "It's just like the old days," she said. "Witch hunts, scapegoats." The poster in the film embodies that history returning, this time under a new banner of purity. It also reveals the complicity of ordinary people. The shopkeeper who put it up might have believed he had no choice. Or perhaps he agreed with it, or was too scared to tear it down. That ambiguity is essential. Evil doesn't always look like a dark mark in the sky. It can be the silent acceptance of a poster in the window. That's what makes the sign so effective as a storytelling device. It indicts not only the Death Eaters, but the society that allows them to thrive. Even Harry, the boy who lived, cannot stop it in that moment. He can only walk past. That powerlessness is part of the tragedy. He is a hero, yes, but he is also a boy in a world unraveling around him. The poster is a reminder that he cannot save everyone, cannot fix everything. His war is not just against Voldemort, but against the system that enables him. The sign foreshadows the impossible choices he will have to make, the friends he will lose, and the corruption he will witness, even among supposed allies. That quiet moment in Diagon Alley, that flickering sign, stands in stark contrast to the noisy battles to come. There are no wands drawn here, no explosions, just a paper sign, half torn, unnoticed by most. But it is one of the most frightening things in the film, because it is real. It is how terror begins, not with roaring crowds, but with silence, with paper, with a command to register. It's the same wizarding world, but it has changed, and Harry, for all his courage, knows it. Through that single poster, the film encapsulates the theme Rowling so carefully built, that the real enemy is not just Voldemort, but the ideology of blood purity that survives him. It was there before him, will linger after him, and infects every corner of magical society. The sign is its manifesto, its polite introduction. It is the proof that Voldemort's rise is not an anomaly, but the culmination of old prejudices long ignored. It is the chilling answer to Dumbledore's warning, "Dark times lie ahead of us, and there will be a time when we must choose between what is easy and what is right."